You should have armed yourself. That's where people fuck up. You never wait. You never sit there and wait unarmed because you never know what the other person has. What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Yashay, in the beat. Back at y'all with another one. And my headphones fell off. Alright, we back on this part 2 of the Booby Trap by Mr. Ballin. Now, if you wanted to, if you would kindly box the like button until it gives in, and then kick him in the mouth. Then say, nigga, you better like Kid Yashay's fucking video. Alright, let's get into the video. Enough of that pussy ass shit. You feel?
Summer of 2019, a grandmother named Barbara was looking after her grandkids for the weekend while her daughter and her husband were out of town. Her daughter had 3 kids, 2 that were under the age of 6 and 1 who was 15 years old, and her name was Alyssa. And so anytime Barbara was looking after her grandkids for longer than just a single day, like if she was taking care of them overnight, she would just stay at their house so as not to disrupt their lives more than she needed to. And so their house was a modest single-story home in a nice suburb of Dallas, Texas, where the crime rate is basically 0 and everybody in the neighborhood knows each other. And
so y'all suckers, easy pickings. Y'all don't know nothing about how grimy the real world is. Y'all know how grimy the real world is.
So this particular night that she's over there looking after them was like any other. She put the 2 young ones to bed first, and then she and Alyssa stayed up a little bit later in the kitchen chatting, talking about school, before ultimately both of them.
Man, I hated that as a kid. Like, your teenage sister or teenage, fuck it, I'm gonna use it for my point of view. My teenage sister used to like stay up all night, and I was like, they'd be like, all right, you got school tomorrow, you gotta go take a shower, go to bed. I'm just like, fuck, why did she get to stay down here? And then my sister be like, why the fuck you worried about me? And then I just go back upstairs, I'll go upstairs and be like, fuck it, man, I guess I gotta take a shower, go to bed. But then when I grew up, and there's a little kid in the household, they ain't do none of that shit for him. Nah, just playing. They do. But let's get back into the video. Just a little story.
Of them went to bed. So because their house is a single-story home, all the bedrooms are on the only floor of the house. And so Barbara and Alyssa's room were right next to each other, looking out to the side of the property. And so as soon as Barbara got in her room, she opened up the window that was right next to her bed, because as a kid, she always slept with the window open. And even though her daughter's house had air conditioning, she preferred to keep the window open. So window's open, she has a screen that's in her window.
Y'all niggas didn't get mosquitoes and little black things in your room and shit. Boy, I go, man, hell nah. She must be used to it. I sleep with the window open, I'm getting bit up. Like 2 seconds later, I'm like, fuck, man. Why y'all after me? They want this good Yashay blood, you feel me?
And Barbara crawls into bed and she falls asleep. At about 3 a.m., Barbara wakes up to the sound of rustling coming from outside of her window. And so she hears it, but it sounds an awful lot like it's probably just a dog or a cat or some other animal that's in the area. It did not seem like a big deal to her, and she was just going to forget about it. But then she heard it again, and it sounded much more like footsteps, and they sounded heavy enough that it probably couldn't be a dog or a cat. And so she rolled over onto her elbows, and she pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out the screen door. And so the moon was out, so there was pretty good illumination, and so she could clearly see the side of the house. She could see the side of the house, she could see the fence that separated their property and their neighbors, and then she could see the neighbor's house and all their lights are off. And she noticed propped up against the fence on their side of the fence, so on their property, was this bike that she didn't recognize. And she's looking at it thinking, is that Alyssa's bike? It's too big to be either of the 6-year-old's bikes. Whose bike is that? And as she's looking at the bike, she hears more rustling coming from the left, which is closer to Alyssa's room. Barbara presses her face up against making the sound is now out of her view. And as she's got her face pressed up against the screen trying to look, she sees a boy emerge from the bushes from right underneath Alyssa's room. He's got that high school Letterman jacket, like the classic, football jacket that high school kids wear. He comes out of the bushes wearing that, and he's got his hood pulled up, and he doesn't look over at her. He's just backing up away from Alyssa's room, and he's looking up into Alyssa's room. And so Barbara immediately thinks, okay, this guy is probably one of Alyssa's friends, maybe a boyfriend.
Maybe a rapist. Yeah, I thought so too. Maybe a boyfriend.
I don't know. And Alyssa must have invited him over. Maybe she invited him when she knew her parents were going to be out of town, but before I said I was going to be here to look after them, and that message didn't get passed to him, and so he's here. All these scenarios are going through Barbara's head, but all she knew is she's not going to call the cops on some teenage kid that's coming to say hi to Alyssa. Instead, she's going to confront him because Barbara was actually a high school teacher and had been for decades. And so she'd had lots of run-ins with badly behaved teenagers, and she was pretty good at standing her ground and being firm and kind of getting teenagers to listen to her. So she figured she would just go out there and be stern with him and he'd get the message. And so she quietly gets off of her bed.
Back to back at the nigga just like his lethal weapon.
She walks out of her room to the front of the house. So he's over here, side of the house. She's going to the front of the house. She flips on the lights as soon as she's outside, and she quickly walks around to the edge of the porch where she can poke her head over and see right down the side of the house where this kid's going to be. So she pokes her head over and she goes, "Can I help you?" And this kid turns and looks at her for the first time, and immediately Barbara's like, "Oh, whoa, he is not a teenager. He looks like he's in his 20s, if not 30s. No matter what, he is a lot older than Alyssa." And it caught her so off guard, she didn't really know how to react to it. She was just looking at
That's where you go get the cannon! You feel me?
this guy who looks so much older, but he's got a bike and he's wearing a Letterman jacket. And so Barbara's a little bit confused.
That's what we would call in the hood a bum.
And so she's thinking to herself, okay, it's possible that he could just be one of those kids that looks a lot older than he really is. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she's thinking, this doesn't feel right. This feels like a grown man is trying to get into the house. And so as she's thinking about this, she's also registering that this guy, he seems completely unfazed. He's just looking up at her, and he actually starts taking steps towards her to the point where Barbara says, "Stop where you are." And he does. And he looks up at her and he says, "I'm looking for Alyssa. Is she home?" And so as Barbara is just glaring at this guy, hoping that will be enough to get him to leave, but he's not leaving, it occurs to her that this could be a misunderstanding. And so thinking on her feet, she says to him, "Who did you say you're looking for? Lisa?" Without any hesitation, he goes, "No, I'm looking for Alyssa McCarran. She lives here." Barbara went silent for a second because he was right. That was her name, and she certainly was here. But she did not want him coming anywhere near the house until she had a chance to talk to Alyssa and confirm that she had invited him here, or at the very minimum, that she knew who he was. And so Barbara says to the guy, "I need you to stay right there. It's 3 a.m. I don't know you." And so Barbara says to the guy, "I need you to stay right there. It's 3 a.m. I don't know you. Give me a minute. I'll be right back." And he appears to get the message. And so Barbara went back inside the house. She shut and locked the door behind her. And then she went into Alyssa's room and she shook her foot to wake her up. And so Alyssa kind of sits up and she's looking around and she's like, "What's going on?" And Barbara looks at her and she's kind of annoyed with how the night's gone. And at this point, she's kind of blaming Alyssa for probably having invited this strange creep over to their house in the middle of the night. And she says to Alyssa, "Did you invite a boy here tonight?" And Alyssa's like, "No, what are you talking about?" Barbara narrowed her eyes and she said, "Well, there's a boy outside that clearly knows you. He asked for you by name and he knows you live here and he's outside right now. Can you please go out there and tell him that coming over unannounced at 3 a.m. is not very polite and he shouldn't do it again?" Alyssa's confused and she's looking at her grandmother like, "What are you talking about?" And so she leans back and she opens the curtain of her window and she looks outside and immediately she pulls her head back in and she says, "Grandma, he asked for me by name?" And Barbara's like, "Yeah, he said Alyssa McCarran lives here." And Alyssa's like, "We have to call 911. I've never seen him before in my life." Suddenly, everything made sense for Barbara. This was a stranger. This is not a friend. This is probably a grown man, and he was probably trying to break into Alyssa's room. And so as she's having this realization, they both hear footsteps out on the front porch. And at this, Barbara goes into full protective grandmother mode, and she tells Alyssa, "Stay in your bed, do not move." And Barbara runs out of her room. She goes into her bedroom, and she shuts that window and locks it, and then runs to the front of the house to make sure that door was locked, because she thought she locked it when she came in, but she wasn't 100% sure. She gets right in front of it, and she can see that it's locked. And now she's standing right on the other side of the door, kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. And this guy is standing on the...
You should have armed yourself. That's where people fuck up. You never wait. You never sit there and wait unarmed, because you never know what the other person has. He might have a gun and a Leatherman jacket because he probably knew it was going to be trouble, or he's probably a rapist like I thought. And he's going, you know what I'm saying, shut down, shut up type shit. So you should never be unarmed. You should have grabbed the biggest knife in the kitchen. Look, all right, It's two scenarios you could have. There's two ways you could have handled this. You could have went, I'ma show him that I'm more crazier than he is. Grabbing a butcher knife, coming right at him like, what's up then? Aggressive. Or you can go protective, like he said she would. You can grab a knife, waiting at the other end of the door, kick the door down, stab his bitch ass. He gonna run, or he gonna try to fight. If he try to fight, keep stabbing his bitch ass. Hey, somebody getting out of here tonight.
Porch, but obscured. She can't see him because he's on the other side of the door, and it's silent for a second. And as she's standing there just waiting for something to happen, she hears knocking on the door. And it startled her when she heard it, and she yelled out, "There's no Alyssa McCarran here. You have the wrong house. You need to leave or I'm calling the police." And the knocking stops for a second, and he says, "I know Alyssa lives here. Tell her to come outside." He goes back to knocking, and Barbara picks up her phone and she calls 911, and she intentionally talks really loudly into the phone, making it very obvious she is calling the police. And very clearly this guy picked up on what Barbara was doing because the knocking stopped and she saw him through the little slit of glass next to the door run to the left of the house back towards the side where his bike was. And so Barbara, while on the phone, runs into the bedroom where she was sleeping, and she looks out the side window, and the last she sees of this guy is riding his bike across the street. And then he stops next to an SUV and he opens a trunk and he throws the bike in the trunk, and he gets in the passenger side of the car and they drive off, which means whatever he had planned to do with Alyssa or whatever he was doing this night, he had an accomplice. The police show up a couple minutes later, and at this point, this creep and whoever he was with are long gone, but Barbara still gives her description of the vehicle and description of the night and what happened, and the police told her that over the past couple of weeks, they've gotten very similar reports from other households where there are young girls inside of the house. Apparently, this boy was actually a grown man that would use social media to figure out where kids lived, and then he would dress up like a teenager, and then he would go stalk them. And so whatever Alyssa had listed online, he had been able to deduce that she lived there, and who knows how long he had been looking in the window at her at night. In 2018, an up-and-coming Instagram influencer named Wendy was contacted by a hotel in...
I'm gonna give my guess. Y'all give y'all guess in the comments right now what y'all think finna happen. It just said influencer, and he's talking about a young girl on Instagram. I believe this girl was trying to be an Instagram model, and then she linked her address on accident, listening to one of her fans. Somebody came up there and got her, or she got out of Dodge at the last second. That's my guess. Y'all give me yours in. Appreciate you.
Miami, Florida, that wanted to see if she'd be willing to stay at their property over Memorial Day weekend. They said they were willing to cover all of her expenses as long as she was willing to post a couple of times while she was at the hotel showing off how great the hotel was. They also told her to bring along a female friend, and that friend, they would cover all of her expenses as well. Even though Wendy didn't know if she had any girl friends that would want to do this with her, she was so eager to take them up on this opportunity because she was trying to make...
Bring pepper spray, a cannon, anything protect. Always protect yourself. Always have something to protect yourself in an unknown environment. Or at least when you first get there, figure out everything. Look around, see what's going on. If they got windows like this, shit, all right. The dude said, all right, just jump out the window and I'll be straight. Type shit.
Being an influencer be her full-time job, and so opportunities like this were huge for her. And so she said yes, even before she knew if she could bring along a friend like they asked her to. And so sure enough, over the next couple of days, as she reached out to her network to see if there's any females that wanted to come with her, everybody was either busy or wasn't that interested, or they had plans. And so since she did not want to cancel, she thought, well, it can't be that big of a deal if I bring along a male friend. And so she reached out to her good friend Mitch, who's this 6'4" athletic guy who was just one of her close friends, and she said, hey, would you mind coming along with me to this thing in Miami over Memorial Day
9 times out of 10, that's her fuck buddy
weekend? I need someone to go with me. They asked for a female, but you're gonna have to do. And so Mitch agreed to do it, and Wendy thought to herself, well, worst case scenario is they're not willing to pay for Mitch's, expenses, and that she would pay for them, and she told Mitch as much. And so they thought that was just fine. They figured that was a good solution. And so the day arrives, and Wendy and Mitch are really excited about this trip. You know, they don't often get to go travel around as influencers. And so they hop on a plane, they fly first class to Miami. When they get there, they go down, they get their bags at a baggage claim, and then they go out to the curb, and right away, Wendy sees there's this really well-dressed guy with dark sunglasses on, and he's holding up a sign that has her last name on it and the logo of the hotel on it. And so she waves to him and walks over, and Mitch is following right behind. And this guy looks at her and he says, okay, well, where's your friend? And that's when she says, oh, well, actually, you know, I brought Mitch because none of my girlfriends wanted to go. So I brought Mitch along. And so this guy lowers his sunglasses and he looks at Mitch and he kind of looks up and down. And then he puts his sunglasses back and he turns and he walks towards this beautiful black SUV that's parked right up against the curb. And so when
he thought he had a groupie, he thought he had a two groupie that he can take advantage of.
Wendy and Mitch follow him, and this guy opens up the back door, and Wendy and Mitch get in. The guy takes their luggage and puts it in the back of the vehicle and shuts it. And as soon as Wendy and Mitch sit inside of this car, the driver is visibly upset. He's kind of ranting and raving, and the front passenger window was down. And so Wendy and Mitch assumed he must be yelling at someone outside of the vehicle, like this guy that had just picked them up. He must be communicating with him somehow. He can't possibly be yelling at us. We just got here. We don't know him. But sure enough, as they kind of are tuning into what he's saying, he has a very thick accent and he's saying, where is the other girl? You're not supposed to have a guy. It's two girls, not one girl, one guy. It's two girls. Where is the other girl? As Wendy is hearing this, she feels so uncomfortable, not just for herself, but for Mitch too, because she asked him to come along and had said, oh, it won't be a big deal. They won't mind. But I mean, clearly they do mind. And so Wendy's trying to explain to the driver that, I know you asked for a female friend, but I didn't have a female friend. And so I brought him along. I will pay for him. I'm not asking you guys to pay for him. I'll pay for everything that he touches. I'll pay for his hotel, his flight, everything. But the driver didn't seem that upset about who was paying for Mitch. His frustration came from a place of being frustrated, like they weren't going to be able to do whatever they had planned to do because now Mitch is in the mix. And so as Wendy and the driver are kind of going back and forth and the driver's getting more and more frustrated, the guy that had originally greeted Wendy and Mitch hopped in the front seat, and he and the driver started arguing with each other in Portuguese. And so for about a minute, Wendy and Mitch are looking at each other like, what is going on here? And these guys are yelling at each other, and then they stop, and the driver turns around again, and one more time he says to Wendy, where is the other girl? And Wendy says, there is no other girl. It is Mitch and I. Tells them to get out. And so Wendy and Mitch climb back out onto the curb. The guy shuts the door behind them. He hops back in the front seat and that car peels away. That was it. At this point, Wendy's thinking to herself, I bet those two guys have nothing to do with the hotel and the people that I had been communicating with to set this whole thing up. I bet they are just the drivers and they were told to pick up two girls, and we showed up with a girl and a guy and it screwed them up and they got mad, and they got really mad, I guess, and then they left. And so I bet if I can just get in touch with the people at the hotel, the people I had spoken to, that they can clear this whole thing up. And so she opens up her email and she sends a message to Marissa, who was one of the people at the hotel that she had been going back and forth with when she was buying her plane ticket. And then she sent another message to the Instagram account that had over 10,000 followers that she had been going back and forth with quite a bit, that had actually originally reached out to her. And so for a couple of minutes, Wendy is watching her phone, waiting for a response. And at some point, Mitch says to her, by the time we get a response to either your, Instagram DM or your email, we probably could have just taken an Uber over to the hotel and spoken to them directly. So why don't we just go do that? And so they agree, they hop in an Uber and they drive the short distance to the
Uber everywhere, any place, any day. Yeah, Uber everywhere.
This hotel. And as soon as they get out, Wendy notices something that at the time did not seem like a big deal, which was the logo of the hotel, the one in real life right in front of her. It was a little bit different than the one that is on the Instagram page, the one she'd been talking back and forth with. That was their profile picture. It's different than the one in real life. And so that stood out to her just because she had looked at that page a number of times. But it was definitely the same hotel, and so she didn't think much of it. And she and Mitch walked inside right up to the front desk, and Wendy asked to speak with a manager. And shortly thereafter, a manager comes out and she asks Wendy and Mitch to come into her office. They go inside and she says, okay guys, what's going on? What do you need? And so Wendy explains the framework of the deal she had negotiated with Marissa. And she said, look, when I got to the airport, the guys that picked us up were incredibly rude and they wouldn't give us a ride here. And I just want to let you know what happened. We don't care. We got a ride here, but we just figured you should know. And the woman looks at her kind of puzzled and she says, who was the person you talked to? You said Marissa? And Wendy's like, yeah, Marissa. She's the marketing person here. And the manager looks at her and she says, no, I'm the marketing person and my name's Kelly. I think you're at the wrong hotel because we don't have any influencers that are here right now, and I would have known about this. Wendy can't believe it, and she pulls up the Instagram page she's been talking to and she shows it to the manager. And the manager takes it and she's pretty surprised by what she's looking at. And she's like, this is our old account. We deleted this, or I thought we deleted this. We have a new one because we rebranded. We have a brand new logo, everything's new, and we just felt like we'd start fresh. So I don't know who owns this account now, but that is our account. It's just, we don't use it anymore. I don't know how anyone got a hold of it. At this point, it clicked for Wendy that this whole thing was a facade, that this whole time she was being conned.
That's why he got pissed off, because it was a girl and a boy. They was trying to get they freak nasty on some bullshit. They was gonna kidnap y'all.
And what really scared her is, to what end? What were they trying to do with her? Had she shown up with the other female friend, what would they have done with her? But at this moment, Wendy just feels totally overwhelmed by the entire moment. She's so embarrassed that she thought this was real, and she dragged Mitch along, and this whole thing was just fake. She's so embarrassed that she just approached this manager who basically said, that's all fake. And so she just wanted to leave. And so she stands up and she says, you know, I'm really sorry for wasting your time, to the manager. And she and Mitch leave. She goes outside and she just sits down and she's crying. And Mitch says, hey, you know, you really ought to call the police and let them know this happened, because, you know, clearly there were plans for you, and, you know, had you brought a female friend, and they can't have been good plans. I think you need to let the police know that this scam exists. And so Wendy does call the police and she explains what happened. And she's surprised when they say, hey, where are you right now? We'd love to send a detective over to you to talk to you a little bit more about what happened. And so Wendy tells them where they are. And, you know, she's a little bit surprised that they want to send a detective over to talk about this, because in her mind, this isn't that big of a deal. I mean, it's a big deal to her and to Mitch, but nothing really happened. But either way, they go sit on the bench right outside the hotel and they wait for the detective to show up. And just a couple of minutes later, he does. He walks up, he introduces himself, and he says, hey, let's go inside and grab a table and we can chat. And so they go inside and they sit down, and Wendy and Mitch go over their story one more time. And after they're done, the detective says, look, I don't mean to scare you, but I do want you to understand just how serious of a situation you guys were just in. So in Miami, human traffickers use these phony hotel Instagram accounts to attract young women like yourself to Miami in order to be trafficked. And so they will buy these old business Instagram accounts from companies that have either rebranded or who are going out of business. They'll pay top dollar to acquire those Instagram accounts. And then they will use them in order to get people like you to come to Miami. And so probably the only reason they didn't follow through on their operation is because you brought Mitch along, who posed a threat to them. And so that's why they were upset with you, and that's why they decided it wasn't worth it. So even though this must have been incredibly traumatic for you, I'm sure you were spared a much worse fate. So that's gonna do it, guys. I hope.
As Fugado said, that's another dead body in Miami. With that being said, this is the video. If you ain't welcome nowhere else, you're welcome here. I would encourage you to join the army before we become multi-glomerate. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers before my birthday. That's 3 days, or before next year. That being said, I'll see y'all in the next one.